Welcome to A Popular History of Unpopular Things, a mostly scripted podcast that makes history more fun and accessible. My kind of history is the unpopular stuff: disease, death, and destruction. I like learning about all things bloody, gross, mysterious, and weird. Just a quick reminder that you can support me and the show on Patreon. Just look up either A Popular History of Unpopular Things or APHOUT, APHOUT. And you can also now watch the show on YouTube, so go subscribe to my channel there. I appreciate all the love and support in trying to make this grow. Now, every once in a while, when I'm crocheting or faffing about in my office, I put on a horror movie. I've always loved horror movies, but you know that, right? But I certainly don't discriminate. I like incredible ones like The Thing. It's great. Put it on, right? B movies that went straight to DVD. Awesome. Love them. I recommend, by the way, the Cube series, which is a Canadian horror series. It's interesting. Interesting horror. Good stuff. And one of my favorite movies, and it gets mixed reviews, but I love it anyway, is the Silent Hill movie that came out in 2006, based on the video game series of the same name. Not so much the sequel Revelations, that one wasn't as good, but the OG from 2006 with Sean Bean, love it. Yes. It's supposed to be an amalgamation of the first couple of Silent Hill games, by the way. For example, one of the main baddies, Pyramid Head, is actually from Silent Hill 2. But the plot, which is running around looking after or looking for your missing daughter, that's adapted from the first Silent Hill game. It also uses the music from the games, which is fun because the soundtracks for those first few games were incredible. And that's probably why I like the movie so much, because it matches the vibe just perfectly. Big fan. Anyway, I was watching Silent Hill again recently, and it got me thinking about the real Silent Hill. Because although Silent Hill is not a real town, it's loosely based on Centralia, a mining town in Pennsylvania that was eventually abandoned because of an underground coal fire that ignited in 1962. And it's still burning to this day. That's right, there's a town sitting on top of an abandoned, burning coal mine. So today, I want to talk about Centralia and the fire burning deep down below the surface in the old coal mines. Because how awesome and weird and creepy is that? No wonder there are movies made about it and games based off of it. What a great location for a horror game. So, for fans out there of the movie franchise, the game series, or both, or just like weird, creepy stories of American ghost towns, let's learn more about the historical context surrounding this coal mining ghost town by looking at how and why an underground coal mine fire can ignite and what that means for the town above. So, let's get started. Centralia, geographically, is located in eastern central Pennsylvania. It sits on the Appalachian Mountains, which means, like a lot of Appalachian towns, it sits on a coal bed. Now, I've done an episode on coal and mines before, the Monongah mine disaster, where a bunch of runaway mine cars went careening back down into the mines and caused a spark, which ignited an explosion, killing all but 5 people inside, 5 miners. 4 managed to tunnel themselves out, and 1 they actually rescued. I'm not trying to repeat too much of the context from that episode, but it is worth saying again that there is a massive bed of coal running underneath the Appalachian Mountains. Coal, of course, is a non renewable resource that we use for energy or to create other products like Coke, not the drug or the soda. Coke, in this context, is a product of coal, I should say, that produces more heat because it contains more carbon. It's a better fuel and energy source, and they use it in things like steel production. Now, coal mining in the Appalachians began in the mid 1700s, supplying local towns and small scale commercial operations. But the real explosion of the coal mining industry, no pun intended, sorry, Monongah, wasn't until the 1800s when railroad lines connected these coal towns together. The improved transportation was good for everyone. It enabled people to access different parts of the country and settle down in new regions. It created even more Appalachian towns as a result. It allowed for the natural resources here, coal, sure, but also minerals, other minerals in the Earth's surface, and timber, the trees, right, to be exported to different markets, creating more demand for what Appalachia had to offer. And once steel mills were built in the mid 19th century, that's the mid 1800s, we get yet another bump in the demand and production of coal and coke. My point is that coal, especially this massive coal seam running up and down the Appalachians, boosted the American economy, and new towns popped up to accommodate the growing number of people flocking to the mines for work. Centralia, incorporated in 1866, was one of these new coal mining towns. Some people were living here before Centralia's official incorporation date, but the town itself, like the industry, really took off when railroads connected the local mines to the wider market. At its peak, Centralia had a population of 2,761 people in 1890. There were 14 different coal mines owned by a variety of different groups, and things were booming. However, over time, mining operations slowed down. It was a combination of both World War I and World War II enlisting the miners to go off and fight in the wars, leading to a labor supply issue in the mines. The Great Depression that followed the stock market crash of 1929, which killed off some of the mining companies. So some mines had to close down. We've also got miner strikes that weakened the industry further. And then there was a general decline in the demands for coal since there was so much supply from mines across the country. Centralia, once a bustling coal mining town, was slowly emptying. Its peak population was more than 2,700 in 1890, right? But by 1960, the population was down to 1,435, according to census data. Almost half of what it once was. Those in charge of the town needed to come up with a solution. What do we do with all of these abandoned mines and coal pits that are unsightly, polluting the environment, and serve as a stark reminder of what the town once was, but was no longer? Well, in early 1962, they decided to turn one of the open air strip mine pits into a landfill. Back in 1956, Pennsylvania passed a law that regulated the use of these types of pits as landfills because they had a history of causing mine fires. So towns like Centralia would have had to apply for a permit and consent to inspections to make sure that a fire wouldn't break out. Great, sounds like a good idea. As long as it is inspected and everything is good to go, why not, right? So, an inspector came and looked at the Centralia pit in question that they wanted to turn into a landfill and noticed some holes in the walls and cracks of the floor of the pit, which opened up access to the mines below. These would need to be plugged up with materials that couldn't burn so that the mine below wouldn't catch fire. Makes sense? Fair enough. So Centralia got to work plugging the holes, and eventually the pit was ready to serve as a landfill. Now, another thing that Centralia routinely did was burn their landfills. Pennsylvania state law prohibited dump fires, but Centralia did them anyway. It was a convenient way to get rid of some of the landfill waste, making room for more. So, over Memorial Day weekend, 1962, the council instructed the local fire department to conduct a controlled burn of the pit landfill. The fire went ahead as scheduled, and when it looked like the bulk of it had burned away, the fire department soaked it with water until they thought it was out. Can you guess what I'm about to say? The fire wasn't completely out. It looked like it might have been from the surface, right? They soaked it, there was nothing coming up, maybe just a little bit of residual steam, but the fire had dug deeper than they anticipated and was smoldering near the bottom of the landfill, just above those plugged holes and cracks of the strip mining pit that would have led into the mine tunnels below. Now, 2 days after they supposedly put out this fire, someone walking by noticed that there were still smoke and flames coming from the landfill. So the firefighters were called back to cover it with more water. But the fire kept coming back. So the firefighters had to go deeper into the landfill, moving waste aside to see how far down these embers were burning so they could put them out. And in doing so, they discovered a pretty big hole, about 15 feet long and several feet high, at the base of one of the walls of the pit mine. It had never been properly filled in with non combustible materials. And this hole led right into the labyrinth of tunnels of the old mines running underneath the town, or at least the area outside of the town where this landfill was. It was in mid July, during a monthly inspection of the pit, that it was confirmed that the mines underneath the landfill were definitely on fire. They were able to measure large amounts of carbon monoxide coming out from the cracks and holes, something that could only come from the mine fires below, not from burning landfill trash. The carbon, you see, that floats around in the mine shafts and the tunnels, and also the pockets of methane gas and other gases that naturally occur in and around coal seams, had ignited. Ooh, let's talk about how carbon monoxide can kill you. Fun. So, carbon monoxide is colorless and odorless, so it's actually pretty hard to detect. It comes from burning fuels like gas, or wood, or propane, or charcoal, any of that kind of stuff. It's why you should not have a fire in an enclosed space, like a camping stove in a sealed up tent, because of carbon monoxide accumulation. Now, when there's a lot of carbon monoxide in the air, it gets absorbed into your bloodstream. The body replaces oxygen in your red blood cells with carbon monoxide, and that causes tissue damage. The symptoms that you'll get are headaches, weakness, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, confusion, blurry vision, drowsiness, and when it gets really bad, meaning you have a very high concentration of carbon monoxide in your blood, you might have a loss of muscle control and eventually a loss of consciousness. Repeated or prolonged exposure can lead to memory loss, changes in your personality, or even problems with movement. And these can be permanent complications depending on the severity of your exposure. Now, if you're in a space that has too much carbon monoxide, go outside. You need to breathe in more oxygen to replace the carbon monoxide in your blood. But the real danger is if you're already asleep and there's a carbon monoxide leak in your house. The carbon monoxide can kill you, and you won't even know it because you'll just never wake up. For those who have been exposed to a lot of carbon monoxide, they'll need to access oxygen masks, those emergency ones that they will bring, right? If you're suffering from a lack of oxygen, to breathe in pure oxygen to try to bring you back. And here's my public service announcement. Your home needs to have a carbon monoxide detector. You just need one. A lot of times you can get combination fire and carbon monoxide detectors. You know, the little round thingies on your ceiling, you can get a combination fire carbon monoxide detector. Remember that carbon monoxide is colorless and odorless, so you won't be able to detect it on your own. You're not just going to know. You're not going to walk into a room and see it, right? Like you would have no idea. And it can leak out of faulty appliances, by the way, your furnaces, your boilers, anything. So be safe out there. Now, in his book, Fire Underground, The Ongoing Tragedy of the Centralia Mine Fire, David DeKok, who is an expert on the topic, who was there in Centralia and spent many years trying to help them, puts it out there that the evidence overwhelmingly points to the landfill fire as the cause of the mine fire. However, Centralia council members disputed this, so there was some controversy over what could have caused it. For example, some claims that the mines were already on fire before the landfill. Now, DeKok did an excellent job laying it all out there, looking at all sorts of records, and I'm pretty confident in his assertion that the landfill, which was not properly plugged up and was illegally and regularly set on fire, spread to the mines below, or at least the fire in the landfill spread to the mines below. And also keep in mind that the fires would spread pretty quickly underground. The passageways built by the miners are basically just pockets of air that feed oxygen to the fire and provide it with space to travel, right? The whole thing would have been ablaze, and any cracks leading to the surface would not only allow the fire to continue burning underground, but also put out all kinds of nasty things like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide into the air, poisoning the local inhabitants. I love the way that DeKok describes it in his book. It paints a really vivid picture of what the mines were like. Quote, the uncontrolled mine fire moved farther and deeper into the labyrinth of mines beneath Centralia. The fire created a deadly world of intense heat and poisonous gases. The blackness of the old mines changed to bright, flowing orange and flickering blue, occasionally punctuated by a brief, brilliant burst of yellow when a mine timber erupted in flames. This was a world where no human could live. Hotter than the planet Mercury, its atmosphere as poisonous as Saturn's. At the heart of the fire, temperatures easily exceeded 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Lethal clouds of carbon monoxide and other gases swirled around through the rock chambers. End quote. And remember, since there were, 14 mines, and most of them were probably connected, there were so many passageways for the fire to travel and grow. And many of these passageways, abandoned and picked at by locals for decades, were open to the surface through cracks or straight up holes. We call that subsidence, when there's a cave in or a hole or a sinking in the ground. And there were lots of those dotted around Centralia and the space around it, which means, again, that there was a constant supply of oxygen for these underground fires, but also ways for the toxic gases to flood the town and the surrounding area. But according to DeKok, that doesn't even matter. Quote, even in the unlikely case that all openings could be found and sealed, the fire could actually draw air through the earth itself. End quote. Another brief tea break. So now that we've got a mine on fire, well, several mines on fire, what do we do? Well, the first plan would be to put it out, right? So, how do you go about putting out an underground mine fire? Well, in short, you don't. I mean, it can technically be done, but it's really difficult to do so, and it depends on the mine itself. And it's costly and could take a long time. For example, the Lehigh Navigation Coal Company had a mine fire that began in 1859, and it took them 80 years, 80 years, and over $2 million to put it out in the 1940s. That would be around 45 million today. And that was an active coal mine run by a company with money. Some of the Centralia mines were abandoned. So, where would the money come from? Well, either from the Centralia municipality or the county government, maybe the state, maybe federal money. The state could allocate some funds for it, but bigger mine fires in nearby Scranton had sapped most of those reserves set aside for dealing with mine fires. But despite all of this, the Centralia Council still had to try to put it out. I mean, you can't just, I don't know, leave a fire burning underground so all your citizens get super sick, right? First, they tried excavating some of the land outside of where they thought the fire was to prevent it from spreading more. The idea was to build a trench around where they thought the fire was to contain it. But every time they drilled, they discovered the fire had already spread there and gone beyond their estimates. So that didn't work. Next, they tried to smother it, get rid of its air supply so the fire would slowly die out. It's like putting the top of a jarred candle back on and watching the fire slowly die. If there's no oxygen, the fire can't feed, and eventually it just gets snuffed out, right? So the plan was to pump some crushed rock and water into the mines to smother the fire, get rid of all the extra oxygen. It would be expensive, and there really wasn't enough water available in the system to do this, but they went ahead and tried it anyway. On the first day, the drill they used to create access holes to the fire below melted. The drill melted. It was that hot. When they eventually managed to get the rock and water into some holes, one of the inspectors noted that, quote, when you dumped water in it, it created like a volcano. And oh boy, when that busted, did that shake things up and make a noise. It was red hot mad. End quote. They kept going, but the project ended up failing because it was too expensive and there wasn't enough water to completely put out the fire. It wrapped up in mid March 1963, cost over $42,000, and didn't solve the problem. So the next plan was to build another trench, a massive trench on the eastern edge of the mine fire on the other side of where Centralia was. This would theoretically prevent it from spreading further in that direction, but would also serve as a chimney of sorts. The carbon monoxide and other gases could vent out from this trench, hopefully sparing the air in and around the town because it would be venting over in that way, some direction, right? There were other projects proposed, but they all cost way too much, and the state government was not willing to fund them. The trench was the cheapest option. They began working on the trench in July 1963, but quickly they found out that the fire had already spread there. It might have been a helpful solution had they kept going and done this trench properly, but the project was called off later that year in October 1963 when it was discovered that the fire was on both sides of it. There wouldn't be a fourth serious attempt to put out the mine fires for another 3.5 years. And by that point, it was too late because the fire had grown even larger over time. And essentially, every time they did some exploratory drilling to see how far the fire had progressed, it was much farther along than they had anticipated, making the project even more expensive. So any concrete plans they had about putting the fire out were abandoned. The state had the money to tackle underground mine fires, but they didn't seem to have the money for them. As DeKok put it simply, quote, the cost benefit ratio just wasn't favorable to Centralia. End quote. The town was forgotten. Now, some work was carried out over the years, but it was never really a proper solution. In 1967, they tried filling some of the cracks in and around Centralia's streets with fly ash, which is a fine, non combustible byproduct of burning coal. The idea was to fill any voids with this stuff so the fire couldn't spread there. Right? Kind of like the trench situation, but instead we're going to fill the holes to prevent the fire from moving past them. It wasn't really a great solution, and they didn't tell Centralia's residents that. And today, we know that fly ash is really toxic and can cause all kinds of cancers and whatnot. It's also filled with toxic metals that can leach into underground water supplies and polluting those. We didn't know all that back then, but still, not a great solution. Now, when they started drilling holes and opening up pits in town to fill the mines with fly ash, the people suffered from massive amounts of carbon monoxide that flooded the air. People got sick, plants were dying, it was seeping into people's houses through open windows. You can look up pictures of the place where steam was escaping from cracks in the ground, and you can see that the trees all around that are dead. You can see like very clear lines of dead trees, which tells you where the steam was rising from the mine fires. It makes it super clear to see it. It's kind of a haunting image. Now, it was at this point that people started leaving their homes, some temporarily until they thought the solution might be fixed, because of course the government's going to help them, right? But some moved out permanently. It was clear that the fire was underneath Centralia, it was kicking out toxic gases. The government wasn't really doing anything to, like, comprehensively solve the problem, and to stay in the town might mean death. They tried a few more solutions once they cut through enough red tape and bureaucracy. In 1969, they built another trench to help vent any toxic fumes that got around the fly ash barrier that they put in. And it seemed like that they might have helped, actually. But then the construction got too expensive, and state and federal officials ended the project and told contractors to fill the trench hole back in. It was the wrong choice. Daniel Lewis of the US Bureau of Mines, who was instrumental in trying to help Centralia, said, quote, then, when he got to the massive fire, the massive burning pillars, and we ran out of money and he couldn't get no more money, then orders were that we had to backfill that. We had the fire in our grasp. There's no question about it. I'll stand on that till the day I die. We had that fire. End quote. But once again, it was a question of money. The state and federal government were willing to allocate some money, but not enough to see the project done properly, because Centralia wasn't as bustling a mining town as, say, Scranton. So, because of this, it was denied the funding and resources needed to put this fire out before it spiraled even more out of control. The population of Centralia in 1960 was, according to census data, 1,435. In 1980, it was just over 1,000. And even though it was almost 20 years after the mine fire began, things are going to get worse. Valentine's Day 1981, a 12-year-old boy fell into a subsidence that opened up in Centralia. The hole it created swallowed the boy up and vomited steam with a lethal amount of carbon monoxide into the air. Luckily, they got the boy out and he survived the incident, but it shook up town and state officials, and they put together another task force to see what could be done. The following month, in March of 1981, the residents who remained in Centralia had a pretty big scare when a big pocket of carbon monoxide almost killed a bunch of residents. Holes and cracks were opening up all the time from fires burning underground, and subsidence was still a major problem. A heavy concentration of carbon monoxide leaked into homes one night making families feel the now familiar sleepy symptoms they were accustomed to as residents of Centralia. They used to use carbon monoxide monitors to keep track, and if the carbon monoxide reached a certain point, they were supposed to alert inspectors. Well, on the night of the 19th, the carbon monoxide alarms that were working properly were going crazy. One family, the Coddingtons, didn't have their alarm plugged in. They had loaned it to a neighbor. The father, John Coddington, got sleepy from the carbon monoxide seeping into his home that night and went to bed. And in the night, he awoke, unable to breathe, and he fell out onto the floor, alerting his family that something was wrong. He was rushed to the hospital, and it probably saved everyone's lives that night because everybody came to see what was the commotion, got them all up and out of bed before the carbon monoxide could kill them in their sleep. At this point, it had been so long and the fires had gotten so out of control that it was unlikely they could be put out. It was almost 20 years after the fire started. More plans were drawn up, but they were deemed to be too expensive, and it would take years of construction and disruption without a guarantee that it would actually work. So in the end, the plan was to fund a relocation of the population. In 1980, the population was 1,017. In 1990, the census reported a population of 63. And as of the most recent census, 2020, the population of Centralia was listed as 5. And once those who stayed behind in Centralia die, their houses are going to be transferred to the state, and Centralia will no longer be a tiny town with a handful of residents. It'll just be a ghost town, a ghost of what it once was. DeKok puts it really well in the closing of his book. Quote, Centralia will live on for a time in the memories of its former residents, but eventually they, too, will die. Only the written and filmic record will remain to tell the story of how the ruination of the land created conditions for the town's destruction, how human misjudgment struck the match, and how bureaucracy let the Centralia mine fire burn, unable to figure out how to stop it. End quote. The fire still burns to this day. And experts say it will burn for another 250 years. And the thing is, it's not even the only underground mine fire in Pennsylvania. There are currently, as of late 2023, early 24, 38 known active mine fires in the state alone burning underground. There are reportedly 259 in the whole country, and those are just the ones that are documented that we know about. But Centralia stands as an example of what not to do in the case of a mine fire. First, it showed us what happens when a mine fire is allowed to go out of control. And second, it taught us that we need to attack the mine fire as early as possible with everything we've got, money, time, and resources, to prevent it from swallowing up the town whole. Thank you for joining me for this episode of A Popular History of Unpopular Things. My name is Kelly Beard, and I hope you've enjoyed the story of the underground coal fires. Thank you for supporting my podcast, and if you haven't already checked out my other episodes, go have a listen. You can also support me and the show on Patreon. Just look up A Popular History of Unpopular Things and join as a cannibal, an explorer, or a historian. If you're interested in more content, or you just want to be a lovely person and support me in the show, then check out my Patreon and subscribe to F Out on YouTube. Be sure to follow my podcast, available wherever you listen, so you know when new episodes are dropped. And stay tuned to get a popular history of unpopular things.